Welcome, everyone, to Quick Moments and Passionate Pursuits The Unfolding, where intuitively guided conversations are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspectives along the way. And we're your hosts, Beth
and Bridget Corns.
And today we're going to be talking about how do you know something's right for you? How do you know, like inside deeply, that a direction, that a situation, that a person, a relationship, how do you know that they're right for you? And so we're going to be talking deeply today and sharing stories with you about knowing, that deep knowing, what it feels like in our body, the different types of ways that we're actively engaged in this process of knowing. And if you're like, wait, actively engaged in the process of knowing, tune in, because we're going to be talking about what that looks like and why it's so important for our life.
Yeah, so we both are students of personal growth and development. And we were talking about the process of rewiring the way our brains work. And the fascinating fact that we are really only consciously in control of our actions and our decisions and our thinking 5% of the time, which just seems a little bit terrifying, honestly. So when we're consciously working on rewiring our brains to be more conscious, more present, more mindful of what's going on, sometimes we need to see what it looks like and experience what it feels like in order to build that trust muscle to follow this path
Okay,
of knowing.
before we explain that, did you just hear what she said? Like 5% of the time we're conscious
Hmm.
of what we're like. Otherwise, 95% of the time, our subconscious mind, that's the part of us that is built and wired based upon past expectations, past relationships.
Up to 6 years old. It stops at 6 years old. It's the part of our brain that's built before we're six. So we're not even talking like a brain that is conditioned to be able to make good choices.
So 95% of the time, people are walking around with a 6-year-old operating system for the foundation
Mm,
of how they're interpreting things that are happening in the world and what they know to be true.
yeah.
Okay, so why this is so important is because, listen, we've talked before about we can have these good enough lives. It's not like you're looking around and your life isn't probably pretty good. But there are things that we want different, and there are things that when we think we know something, when we think that we know something, it puts a barrier in front of us learning anything conflictual to that because we know it. So
Yeah.
we're not going to take in new information. We're not going to listen to something that somebody else is saying, oh, this is true. This can happen. You can do this. We're like, oh, no, 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 no. That's not going to happen because from my perspective, my knowing, that is not true. But your knowledge is personal to you. It's not a universal knowledge, which means that if somebody else says that it's true and it's possible, it could be part of your knowing also.
Mm,
But it can't be part of your knowing if you're not receptive and conscious and in that 5% of, wait, I'm going to be open to hear this. And
hmm
so, like Bridget said, we want to, I think these concepts are best understood being illustrated in story and hearing through somebody else's experience. So I think that's the direction that you were going.
Yeah. Yeah. So here we go. So what I was going to suggest is that we illustrate what it was like for us to do this, to have this level of knowing show up for both of us, and to willingly submit to kind of what felt like an unknown direction for unclear reasons, and to just be willing and excited participants in that experience. And I would love to start way back at how we met and kind of follow the trail from there.
Yeah, that's great. You want to dive in? You want to
Yeah.
set this up?
Yeah, let's do it. So what happened when we first met was And there are a lot of steps that both of us had to take in order to get to this point. But let's just start at the point of we had a mutual contact who was my mentor for a program that I was participating in for my business. And how would you describe your relationship with her at that point?
We were actually peers at a Rob Bell event several years prior to that. And then we had stayed in touch because we had such a good connection at that event and ended up connecting for the Women's Accelerator group, which is where both you and I met in that
Yeah.
particular forum that was led by her.
Yeah, so she had been talking about this group she was running, and I just sent her a message and said, "Hey, I mean, it really sounds like this would be something I'd be interested in at this point in my business and my life." And she was like, "Oh, absolutely. This is definitely the right group for you. And in fact, there are some people in this group that I really think you should connect with." So right off the bat, she sort of framed it as there are some connections here that would be really good for you to have moving forward. So that seed was already planted. I was open to that. I was excited, like this small, intimate group of women who are really focused on growing and developing both in their business and in their lives. And so we, how many weeks was it? 6 or 7, I want to say, weeks of Zoom meetings, a
I
couple
feel like it was
months.
6 or 8. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we met for this first Zoom meeting, and I mean, immediately, what they had us doing was introducing ourselves and like what one line about what we do, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you went first, and you start talking, and like, honest to goodness, I'm listening and thinking, well, who the heck is this person? Like, she's using the same language that I would use to describe what it is that I'm doing, like my passion, my purpose. Like if I could have chosen someone to encapsulate that in a sentence, she just did it. And she doesn't even know me. We've never met
Mhm.
before. So
And you
what
know
is
what's
going on?
And you know what's interesting is I remember when, like, you know how you can see peripherally when things are happening and there were all these little squares, right? This
Yep.
one big page with
The
all these
Brady
little
Bunch.
squares, right? And I remember everybody just kind of being where they were. But I remember your little screen, when I didn't know you, I remember you going, and I was like, I wonder why she did that. Like in my mind as I'm talking. And then as soon as you started talking, you were talking about amplifying potential. And I was like, amplifying potential? Why didn't I think of that? I was like, that's awesome. But it resonated with me. I was like, wait, I don't know anybody
Mm,
that is doing exactly what I'm doing or would describe it that way. But
yeah.
what was fascinating to me was when you were talking and how you were talking over the few weeks, I remember thinking, this is weird. Like, I actually said this to one of my dear friends. I said, I I've never met somebody who would talk about the things that, like, usually when I talk to somebody, it's a distinctly different version what they would say than what I would say. And I said, but when I hear her talk, I'm like, oh, I would have said that. I think
Mm,
I have said that.
mhm,
It was weird. It was like you and I were talking about similar topics in the same way. So that right there got me like interesting. Like, so it was like the universe was saying to me, pay attention. And
mm,
it's like there's always like a little edge when something is meaningful, then it's like I experience inside me this lean in, pay attention.
mm,
This is important, right? Given where I'm at right now, pay attention, right? So
yeah.
that was kind of an experience that I had as part of that, knowing that I was supposed to lean in. And then we got an assignment in the class that was to reach out to two people that we didn't know
Mhm.
and get to know them, right? Because
Can
this is
I
a networking.
Yeah, can I pause you really quickly because
Yeah.
you said some part of you had this moment of like recognition.
Hmm.
Well, it's really interesting that you chose that word because I'm the word nerd, so I always bring up the etymology of words. And the derivation of the word knowledge comes from the Middle English, and originally knowledge was a verb, and it meant to acknowledge or recognize.
Mm.
So the root of our idea of the word knowledge is like it's almost like this empty spot in us is planted, and when the right information comes, it fits in and it's a recognition of this is for me.
Ooh, this reminds me of what you talk about, the pull.
Yeah.
This reminds me of the pull. So if we're already filled up with stuff that's ours or somebody else's or whatever, if we're already too filled up, we can't be we're in that stance of I've got too much, and overwhelm makes us pull back.
Mm. Mhm.
Makes us push back. Like we're like, let me move away, right? Because we're
Mhm.
overwhelmed. There's no space to receive. But when we have this openness, this receptivity, even the stance of reception, right? Then that allows us to be pulled towards something
Yeah.
that we recognize,
Mhm.
right? It is this like inner knowledge. I love the etymology that you just threw in there. That's like even acknowledge again. It has the
Yeah.
like to know, right? Has it within knowledge.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I got an assignment to reach out to 2 people,
Yes.
and it was, like, such a no-brainer. I'm like, "Well, even if you wouldn't have assigned us that, at some point, we would have connected because 'cause we're like, you, like, what are you doing? Like, this is cool.
Yeah.
We're right on the same vein here."
Right.
So, I wanna say that I had started following you on Instagram previously and wanted to, like, get to know you and what you were doing and signed up for some of your Zoom classes, and then sent you a message following up on that. We're supposed to connect with people, and, um, I see what you're doing, and it's fascinating. You wanna talk.
Hmm. And then we did.
Yeah.
And every single time we talked, it was like there for me, when something is right for me or not right for me, I pay attention. I notice it within my body.
Mhm.
So I notice it within me. Do I get energized or do I get depleted?
Yep.
Right. So sometimes a conversation dulls me or depletes me or makes me feel less light, heavier.
Yeah.
Or something will make me feel energetically lighter. I get a higher vibration. I'm amplified. It's that image of amplification, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And what happens when we were talking is there was this absolute emphatic yes in my body that was like, whoa, like I couldn't have turned away from it had I wanted to. Like I don't even think there wouldn't number one have been a part of me that did want to. It wouldn't have made sense to me to turn away from it because it was such an emphatic yes. It was like my soul, like
Mhm.
that deep part of me knew that this was a yes.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm one of the things that you talked about like following something for an unknown reason, right? An
Mhm.
unknown path for an uncertain reason. And part of that is our egos want to understand where it's going to lead. But our souls just know, oh, we don't know if it's a specific outcome or what the meaning's going to be or if it's learning.
Yeah.
We have no idea. We ascribe all this egoic meaning, but there's like, we don't know. But what we do know when we follow a soul path is we know that the data in front of us, this says move forward. Like we
Yeah.
know that. And it doesn't mean it has to be a static no. It means it has to be a attentive knowing so that we can make shifts along the
Mm.
way.
Oh, I love
Something may
this.
shift,
Yeah,
right?
I love the way you just described that. Yeah, it's again, we're going back to the idea of being. conscious and mindful and present. And this level of knowing almost requires of us this conscious attentiveness to each step of the way. So as opposed to, like, I'll give two examples. As opposed to I don't know, when you're on a slide, there's one direction. Like, you're on it, you go.
Hmm.
It's easy. But this level of knowing is a level that's like you are following this path through the woods and it's marked every 25 trees. So you've got to be present and attentive to the surroundings to know, okay, this is the direction that I'm going to continue taking because there's the next mark. And then you get to that mark and it's like, oh, yes, this is right. And then you see another mark and you're like, oh, yep, this is right. Um, it's that presence of knowing
Mm.
versus just it's a one and done kind of thing.
So that reminds me, so this presence in knowing reminds me of part of that presence feels intuitive to me.
Oh, it totally is.
It
Yeah.
feels like there's some sort of like, so when you're looking at that path, there's all of this around you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going like this. I'm not going like this. You said I'm following the path. My intuition is this path is relevant.
Yep.
But what if this tree line was, I have the relevancy of, like, it seems relevant to this particular path, right?
Mm-hmm.
You say something about that. You had some sort of comment that I think is interesting here around intuition. What was that?
When did I say that?
You had something that you found around knowing with intuition.
Oh, right. So if we go way, way, way back in antiquity, knowledge originally meant like it had this sort of divine context, this
Mm.
scriptural sacred context. And what it meant was an intuitive knowing of hidden mysteries.
Ooh. Okay, wait. Say that again.
So knowledge was actually referring to an intuitive knowing of hidden mysteries. So there's no way that you can access this knowing through books, through videos, through other people. It's totally interior to yourself. It's
Oh my gosh.
completely intuitive. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So what this feels like is when we're talking about subconscious, this 95% of the time we're in this subconscious place. That's the past.
Yep.
Our subconscious mind is based upon our past experiences. That 5% presence in the here and now asks us to bypass the past,
Mm-hmm.
to be fully seated in the now. So if you looked at this situation from your past lens, you may be like, ooh, danger. I'm on a
Mm-hmm.
trail. I'm on a path. I remember this one time where I was on a path and I came around a corner and there was a bear. Danger, right?
Yep.
If you take this out and you say, I'm going to be firmly seated in now, and there is no bear in front of me, and that past is irrelevant, right? What you're describing when you talk about the hidden mysteries is future.
Yeah.
You're talking about presence and future. So we're not really living in the present if our subconscious mind, it's like we're really it's like mainly the past.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about this hidden mystery, it's the ripe opportunities that like exist in the now. And the hidden mysteries are if we walk down this path and we let that past go and that subconscious mind go,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of future could we walk into?
And we allow the path to unfold ahead of us. And all we do is honor that path with the next right step. So there is an intuitive knowing of a hidden mystery. In other words, we know that this is correct. We do not know the outcome because that's a hidden mystery. We can
Mhm.
only know in our body that this is correct.
Yes.
And we will not see the end of it when we start out on it. And in fact, we may never see the end of it. It's not about the destination. It's about the path that we're walking. And so the way that I see it, when we first started communicating, we took some major leaps on this path. Both of us had to take these steps because if I would have drifted into that subconscious, I could easily have said, don't get this vulnerable with someone you don't know right away. Rejection is what happens. Misunderstanding, miscommunication. There were a whole, myriad things that could have gone wrong or been dangerous. But when we started out, we were just so amplified and so lit up by the conversations we were having and the ideas that we were exploring together, that it was that level of knowing. It was that
Hmm.
intuitive knowing that there is something big and exciting and we have no clue what it is. Like,
Hmm.
it's not possible for us to know what it is, but that we both had this full emphatic yes of, let's follow it and see where
Hmm.
it goes.
Hmm. There's almost like an innocence to it as you were describing it, which I've never thought about before. There's like this, and maybe innocence is kind of a synonym for lack of ego. Because
Ooh, I'd
like,
be interested to see. Yeah.
you know what I mean? But there's some sort of like when you enter into something without any desire to control or manipulate or
Mm,
move something, you're just genuinely happy to witness it and to be a part of it. It genuinely allows, especially if you're with somebody else, like that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that when you're meeting somebody in a space that allows for you to both know what you know without any desire for it to be different. It's almost like I was like, "Oh, where do you feel like we go next?" Like,
mm,
what do you see like as like a topic? Like I remember the first time we sat down and we were looking at, well, okay, how do we do this? Like, we're gonna do an intro, outro. We're gonna do like what's our cover? Like literally, it was like, what do you think? Oh, that's kind of cool. Let's move in that direction. Or no, how about this? Or let's. It was this constant purity and innocence and total curiosity that allowed for something new to unfold. And that's why I
mhm,
love the title, The Unfolding, because it's like it really has been a genuine, honest excavation on each other's part
mm.
that then we were able to, like, I trust when you say something that you mean something and that it's
Yeah.
something that has been, um, that it's your truth, right? Based upon a conscious thought around what is occurring versus a subconscious script, right?
Can I tell you the etymology of innocence?
Yes.
So the oh gosh, what is it? The Hippocratic Oath, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doctors and nurses have to say, do no harm. Innocence means not harming,
Mm.
not harming. So to enter into something innocently also takes a posture of, I'm not seeking to cause you harm, and I know that you're not seeking to cause me harm either. So
Yes.
anything that we may say is genuinely in the best interest of whatever this space is that we've created together.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that because I really felt that from the outset. We were able to have super vulnerable conversations and just, hold each other in those spaces and really
Yeah.
respect and honor that. And it just felt very, very safe.
That's what I was just gonna say. I was gonna reflect safety. Like,
Yeah.
and that's not something I take lightly, like to be in relation with somebody and to actually feel like it's a safe space
Yeah.
allows us to have the capacity to enter into our own unique knowing
Mhm.
without judgment,
Yeah.
personal judge, like other judgment from another. But then also it allows for us to accept parts of ourselves when we're safe in relation to somebody
Mm.
else, right?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So what do? We kind of came to a mutual agreement that we wanted to create something together. Like there was
Mhm,
something we were being pulled to create together. And we weren't real clear around what it was, although I think pretty early on you'd mentioned, well, I think maybe it's a podcast. Like, and the reason was we were having these like generative conversations that we wanted to document. We're like, we
yes.
can't be the only ones who would benefit from the kind of conversations we're engaging in. So what if we just recorded them? Like
Mhm,
we were talking, at least once a week, having these beautiful conversations. And we thought, let's not lose the record of these. Let's start recording them. And so
mhm.
it was like you said, is that it was a pull into the natural next step, which was we're having these conversations, let's record them and put them out there. So we had only met via Zoom at this point, and it seemed like a logical next step for me to figure out a way for us to meet in person and actually, like, because collective energy is so important to us, it seemed like it would be valuable to see what would happen when we were actually in person and got to experience that. So this sounds so uh ridiculous. Like in hindsight, every time we talk about it, it makes me laugh. But I checked my calendar and the next weekend I was free and I checked airline tickets and I was like, you know what? I could totally book a flight down to Asheville and come to meet you. And then we can have a
4
weekend and
days
get
from
to know
now.
each other. Yeah, in 4 days. And I messaged you saying something to that effect. Hey, if I were to come in 4 days, would you be free?
And I was like, oddly, yes, because usually my schedule is so busy that there was no way. And I hadn't even thought about meeting you face to face yet, but then that totally made sense. But then as soon as you booked it, I was like, why does that totally make sense? And it also totally doesn't make sense at the same
because
time.
because never in my life had I ever never in my life, first of all, had I ever booked plane tickets to go see anyone. Um that was not something I'd experienced before. And also, never in my life had I ever gone to meet someone who I'd never met before somewhere far away from my home. So like no one else is going to be there who I know.
Yeah.
Um Anyone else would have probably said that's not a good idea. But
Hmm.
it went back to that knowing, like it was such a present, what is the word we used to describe it? Like um receptive, like it was just this calm knowing.
Recognition, I think you said.
There was another word I had for it, but it was nothing like anything I'd ever felt before, and it made so much sense that there was no fear or concern attached to that. It was just like, oh yeah, of course,
Mhm.
this makes sense. Absolutely. So I booked it and I flew down to Asheville.
And I think an important distinction there when you were talking is when we try to override a feeling. Like if a feeling comes up and you're like, "Oh, I don't know, this doesn't sound like it's good judgment," and you're trying to override that feeling because of a desire that you have to do something that's
Mm-hmm.
different. That's your intuition in a very different way.
Right.
But when there is nothing in front of you, it's almost like you had no schema for it. You'd never done it before,
Yeah.
so it also didn't have a trail of other, like, um, negative language around it because you hadn't it didn't have anything attached to it, right? It was
Yep.
totally something new, but it was also something new that intuitively felt right to you. So that deep inner knowing, that divine, like you said,
Yeah.
intuition has this divinity to it because it's steeped in the present also the invisible present.
Mm.
There's nothing
Mhm.
visible in front of us that says, yeah.
Yep.
It's literally like the subtle, quiet, pay attention, move forward. It's okay. It's like this reassurance that's not there, but in your body, everything in you is like, "Yeah." Like literally when you said something, and I'm going into the minutia of this for people listening because it's important to understand these moments when they come up
Mhm.
because they're so subtle, you'll go by them
Yes.
like and you won't necessarily understand the meaning. Like literally when you I was in the middle of something when you text me that. And normally I would have been like, shut the front door. Like, what's happening? Like, I would have been like, hang on a second. Let me pause what I'm doing and really pay attention to this and focus. Literally, you said it. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Although I'd never thought about it before.
Yeah.
It was not something I'd ever done before or would have expected. But yet it was like, yeah, check. And then I went back to what I was doing. And later on that night, I was like sharing with somebody that you were going to be coming and sharing about my day. And I was like, huh. Like it was the first time I'd actually realized, well, that's happening. Okay. You know, but
Um, yeah,
there's this quality to it that I just want to try to explain because
right.
it, like you said, if we're consciously rewiring our brains, it's helpful to pay attention to, wow, I made that decision and it was so effortless. It was so in flow
Yep.
that I didn't even acknowledge it or recognize it as anything other than duh.
Yeah.
And that quality worked out.
Yes.
I didn't have to have any more effort. I didn't need to do anything else towards that. So something that isn't right for me requires a lot more effort.
I love that. Yeah. And every step that you take to honor or respond to this knowing is both not necessarily easy, but it's in flow. So it just works out. And also, something that I feel like I'm thinking about now is that where we are now versus where we started required every single one of those yeses and steps.
Hmm.
So there were a lot of moments where you or I or both of us had to respond in the moment to that tug and to that knowing in a certain way. And we did.
Yes. Yeah, and you said it isn't necessarily easy, and I kind of want to point out the distinction for me is effort isn't uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Okay. So when I expend effort, that's not uncomfortable,
Mm-mm.
right? So when I'm acting in a way that requires effort, it doesn't mean that it's an important distinction. Like, does that make
Yeah.
sense? Like,
Yeah. Well,
there's,
where I'm going to go is that the opposite side of this is in these moments where we have a decision presented to us, if we choose not to make that decision or not to move forward or not to say yes, that does cause discomfort.
yes,
That causes discomfort leaning towards suffering and it causes regret. And I know, like, when I say regret, I know exactly where regret lives in my body. I
where,
feel it in my stomach, like in my gut.
yeah.
Um, and that is uncomfortable.
Hmm. Yeah. It's also, though, as you were talking, there's movement and action and inaction is still action, right? So people
Hmm.
think, inaction, like it's remaining immobile and not expending effort that that things won't change, but things actually can change through inaction. You can't,
Yeah.
every change is constant. It's an illusion that you're going to keep things the same, right?
Hmm.
But knowing comes from doing, right? Knowing
Yep.
comes from doing and being. If we keep things hypothetical in our mind, it's purely inadequate. Like we can't
Mm,
hypothetically process the outcome of something that we're looking at doing. And I couldn't say, well, I wonder what it would be like if Bridget did come here for the weekend. And, I can't ease my way into that.
yeah,
It's by doing it and being fully present in that space that allows for that me to know something, if
yeah.
it's going to be right for me or if it's not going to be right for me. But I can't hypothetically say I wonder and work through that and know that.
So,
Hypothetically, we'll keep it at A.
right. So what in English, we don't have ways to distinguish between hypothetical knowing and embodied knowing, but other
Okay.
languages do. So the French language, which I'm familiar with, so I'll talk here. There are two specific words for knowledge that I want to, or verbs, I
Mm,
should say, for knowing that I want to discuss. And there's savoir, which is to know in a hypothetical or factual sense. So, like, I know the sky is blue. I would use savoir. I would say, je sais que le ciel est bleu. I know the sky is blue. That's a fact, but it's also not like something that I can hands-on experience. It's not like an embodied experience of knowledge. But if I'm saying I know something and it's embodied and it's experiential, it's like knowing a person. Like je te
mm,
connais, I know you. I know you because I have experience with you, because we formed a relationship, because there is embodied knowledge of what that feels like and looks like in our conversations. And it's a moving and flowing and doing knowledge. It's not
mm,
just that factual hypothetical.
mm,
So, where I wanted to go was when you know something at this level that we're talking about, this intuitive knowing of hidden mysteries, it's almost as if you have made a covenant with that knowledge. And a covenant is what? An agreement that that knowledge has now become wired into your being. It's
mm,
rewired your brain. It is shifting your DNA. And until you choose to know something else or to change that knowledge, you've agreed, you've made a covenant with this knowledge. I am going to now go be and live my life from a place of this knowledge. That's how deeply it resides within me, that it will change the way I show up in the world.
It's almost like you've made a covenant with the energy, not just the thought or the concept, but you've actually, because what's happened is once you have that thought, then your energy changes to match
Yep.
with that covenant. And then that energy puts into the universe out what your frequency is. And then the frequencies in front of you, so whether that's whoever's in front of you, then that frequency is attaching that, so it's a covenant with that energy that is attached to that thought, that
And then,
knowledge.
yeah, and then where I went from there was that, therefore, this knowing is a spiritual and a physical oneness.
Mm,
That
mm,
it has now caused this thing or person or whatever it is that you know to merge into your identity.
mhm,
And you've accepted it and agreed to allow it to be part of this physical and spiritual vehicle now.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, I like that. It's like, to me, there's a like this sign, this release, this
Mm,
when we're operating purely in our mind and theoretical and hypothetical and all this, there's so much effort.
mhm.
That's like an effort that is, it's not uncomfortable, but it can take energy. It can be depleting,
Ooh, yeah, yes.
right? So it's different when we're operating from this place of we're aligned, knowing almost is like aligned with our heart because
Mm-hmm.
it's something pre-verbal sometimes that we so innately know that we can rest in following it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we rest in following it and we listen to it, it's like it's like life gets better and better. It's like it you're following something that feels like it's for me it feels like it's for your higher, like to be closer to your higher self, right?
Yeah.
Um because it's it's not painful. It's actually like you're being met with something that you're not having to theoretically twist and understand.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're not having to work. There's no effort in making it
Mm-hmm.
right or to fit in with what you think you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it just is.
Yep.
And so it doesn't require effort to be at this like comfortable state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah. And so where did we go? We're in our story. We've met and we've decided on the podcast. It's an emphatic yes. And in fact, we spent the last day that I was there really like getting our episode put out, getting your
Yep.
podcast off the ground and
Started.
launched as well. Yeah. And then what happened?
You know, we just kept showing up.
Yeah.
I feel like we just kept showing up for each other. It's like both of us went through some unexpected shifts in our personal relationships, and we were building professional, very similar careers,
Yeah.
and moving in those directions. So what it feels like to me is that you became somebody that I could really count on, that
Mm,
I could turn to professionally, personally, that you genuinely it felt like you genuinely wanted to um be there for me and under like and to be somebody who was listening deeply to my
mm,
experience and validating that. And for me, I just kept wanting to um show up back, right? Because it did. It has consistently felt like where there were openings, you and have both been willing to step forward,
yeah.
like because of this knowing inside that we've trusted.
Yeah, I find myself experiencing really intense gratitude constantly, and I think we say thank you a lot. And usually the response, like when you say thank you to me, usually the response, my immediate response is like, well, of course. Like I wouldn't have shown up or done anything differently because of course, that's how I would want to be present for
Mhm,
you.
mhm,
Um, and that again is another illustration of when you just have this really peaceful and clear certainty that acting from that place becomes your new second nature.
mhm,
Whereas that subconscious programming was your default. Now what happens is you're so present and you're so certain in this knowing that it is easy in the sense of flow and pull, and of course that's the way that I'm going to go,
mhm,
because to go any other way would be painful and difficult.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. So as uh as much as there's an opening, I feel pulled towards you. And I have a deep knowing that I feel grateful. I feel grateful that I get to continue to get to know who you are and that um, our lives continue to get closer. I feel really grateful for that.
Yeah. And I'm really grateful that every time we get to spend time together, whether it's on Zoom or in person, we continually get to experience these opportunities to say yes to more expansive and amplifying events, places. Like we just get presented with this level of goodness over and over and over and over.
Yeah. And imagine if we hadn't have said yes.
No.
I mean, this is the whole point. This is the whole point.
Yeah.
Like both of it, like I could have been like, you know what? Great. Somebody from the Accelerator. Yeah, she's got some similar stories to me. Maybe she's doing around the same thing. I could have looked at it like, ooh, competition.
Yeah, we could have.
Competition. She's doing the same thing as me. So like why would I be like that? That could be something like whatever. I could have looked at it in a lot of different ways. I could have been like, I'm too busy. I've got a lot of things going on. I don't have room for, you know, a new professional relationship. Um, uh-uh. Like, but that's the thing. When you're attuned, that would make me override the feeling part of me. And the feeling part
Mhm.
of me always knows a better route, like than what my mind knows. Like
Yeah,
I trust that direction. And if either one of us hadn't have taken actions and acted on where we felt the inner knowing was, then we wouldn't be where we are right now.
we wouldn't. Yeah.
Over
Um,
and over.
I think I want to reiterate again that it took getting really clear. And I know that you've talked about this for you, but I'll talk about it for me and then I'll let you kind of discuss what it looked like for you. It took getting really clear on the what and why. Like when I had that opportunity of my heart failure to reevaluate what my life could look like if I were to double down and commit to this higher vision for my life. I got so crystal clear over years. I mean, I have journals full, actually. This one right here, journals full of getting crystal clear on what I wanted for my life, aligned with that higher self, and why it was that I wanted that. I want to feel joy. I want to feel abundance. I want to feel fulfillment. I want to show up and serve the world from the fullest version of who I can be. And I know, and I just knew like this is that gut level, soul level knowing that there has to be someone out there who wants to show up the same way in the world.
Mhm.
And I can't be the only person who's looking at the world in the way that I look at it and seeing things the way I see them and appreciating the divinity of every moment. And I want to talk to someone about that. And I want to talk to someone who like embodies that knowledge too. There
Yeah.
has to be someone else out there in the world showing up like that. And when I got that clear on what it was that I was looking for and why it was that I wanted it, that was when the invitation presented itself to
Mhm.
meet you.
Yeah.
So there's something about getting crystal clear on those things that allows the universe, like it's like an open channel.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're describing is we're being invited to define what our unique personal knowing is. Like, what
Mhm.
is your truth?
Yeah.
I grew up believing that there was this universal truth. There was one truth.
Mhm.
And so the truth was the truth was the truth. But then when I left my hometown and I saw that there were all of these other cultures and all of these other backgrounds, I was like, wait, how does this person have their truth and this person have their truth? And
Mm.
how could they know my truth if they didn't live my life? And, all of this. And so we each get to define with crystal clear clarity, right? That's what you're describing
Yeah.
defining it. We get to know what we know by doing and being,
Mm.
and then adjust according to, did that work out? Did that not work out? But we, like for me personally, when we know what we want with that clarity, then we still have a choice to accept what's in front of us. That's not
Mm.
it. That may have a lot of things that are very similar, or we have a choice to keep aligned with this frequency of knowing that says, I believe that there's somebody else that can do this out here, that wants something similar, that wants that kind of life. And it can sometimes, I think, be like I've been afraid in my life at different times that, am I asking for too much? Am
Mm.
I wanting something that, I mean, there's lots of people out there. Am I wanting something that is impractical? It like so many times it can be like, if you don't see what it is that you envision, then you think that it may not exist. And maybe I'm
Mm.
asking for too much. And I think that allows for us, when we have that crystal clear knowing, to stick to that path and trust that if we stay this course, that of course there are infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
If I exist, then I'm not so unique that something similar to me of what I'm hoping for in this world could also exist, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's what we didn't have the language for when we first met, but we felt some recognition that we're souls that are on a similar knowing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've continued to walk into every week, showing up, every day, showing up for each other, is this deep um, witnessing and appreciation for um, each other, walking in a way that is aligned with our deep knowing, but then is also witnessing the other. Like I've gotten to witness you over the last 6 months walk into your deep knowing.
Mm.
And each of us walking into that knowing has allowed for our relationship to shift, um, as we've allowed each other that space
Yeah.
to define our own knowing.
What a different experience of being in relationship with someone in this way. Like I think I described it months ago as previously I wanted to be in relationships where that person was that person and they stayed that person because
Mm,
change is scary. If someone
mhm,
starts changing, it's like, well, I don't know you anymore. Who are you? That's not the person who I met, however long ago. But it was different because I recognized with you that I had an opportunity to like partner with you and get to love you into these higher levels of becoming your higher self. You're growing constantly and changing, but it's not scary. It's like beautiful and expansive and exciting to get to be a part of that.
mhm. Yeah, I feel the same. You described, this reminds me of Master of Change by Brad Stolberg, and he talks about, we have this opportunity to, instead of it being, we have this order in our life, and then there's this disorder or this change that happens, and then we want to go back to the order that it was
Mm,
before. He
mhm,
describes have this space that's order, and then there's this change, and then there's a reorder. So
mhm.
there's this new information that goes forward, because we have this new information that shifts how the world is and how we see the world. And I feel like that's what we've done is we've had the benefit of watching each other reorder our world
Mm.
and grow closer and love each other more deeply as we've gone along. So super grateful.
Me too.
So our knowing changes as different parts of our life change and as the knowing changes.
I
Like,
don't
right?
even know that the knowing changes. I think that because this knowing is an intuitive knowing of hidden mysteries, that we can almost expect that what we think we know and what we actually know are going to not always align and may shift. And what this knowing asks of us is to deeply trust in the knowing. And when we are invited to the next step of it, to embody the next requirement of that knowing, it's almost like this knowing, like I said, it's a covenant that requires something of us. It's cultivating us to become and to take action on that becoming. And so it invites us over and over and over to step further into the embodiment of that knowledge.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it doesn't mean that there's not pain or there's not confusion or there's not discomfort, or like sometimes what we know can be disappointing, and it's a lesson, or it can be
Yeah.
hurtful to our spirit, or what we thought we know we didn't know. Because here's the thing, we're always interpreting the people in front of us and the situations in front of us through the lens of ourselves.
Yep.
So what we know is only, like, because we're interpreting somebody else, we can't necessarily know somebody else's purest intentions. But what I've found is I have a deeper sense of knowing, like the breath and that knowing comes whenever I'm not working hard to reconcile the behaviors I'm seeing in front of me from somebody else.
Mm,
There's a consistency that allows for my soul and my spirit to rest because I'm not having to work to make sense of things.
yeah.
So many times we think we know something, but it's really, oh, some things are confusing in front of us and it's kind of hard to deal with. And maybe we don't want to deal with it. There's some part of
Hmm.
us scared. And so we're like, let's make some quick sense of this.
Right.
And so we make sense of it in a way that we pretend we know something. We don't.
Yep.
And that discomfort and the anxiety and the frustration and the fear inside of us are actually the metrics and the data that says something's off.
Hmm.
But when I intuitively know something, which is how I feel about you, I know it because I'm not working to reconcile it. You are who you are and you're consistent.
Yeah.
Who you tell me you are is backed up with who I see you being. When you tell me a lot of times you don't even tell me there's
I
kind
don't
of a
tell you.
You don't tell me, you just are. And so because you are, and because my mind says this is my deep knowing and I see it, I don't have to reconcile anything. So there's rest. It allows for me to purely feel what I feel, given who I am. And there's nothing that I have to reconcile. That is innate true knowing.
Mm,
When who you think somebody is, what the situation appears to be, matches up with the crystal clear knowing that you've set forward for your life, and there's nothing to reconcile.
yep.
Like, that's knowing.
Yeah.
You can rest. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have fears in other aspects or other things,
Hmm.
but it means in this, there's a knowing and there's a rest, and there's like this peace that comes from that.
And before we had the invitation to know each other, we also had invitations to make really big changes and steps in honoring that knowing in other places in our lives.
Yes.
So it was almost like, oh, you're going to get a conditioning workout of trusting this knowing before you're invited to
Mm,
this one.
yeah. It was attending to ourselves,
Yep.
being honest with ourselves. And and I think once we're honest with ourselves, then we can start to be honest with other people, right?
Yep. Yeah. I have to trust and know that I am who I believe I am
Yeah.
first. And I it's interesting you said like I've never told you. Like I'm not gonna walk up to you and be like, "Hi, I'm Bridget and I'm a decent human being."
Exactly.
But I had to know for myself, I'm not lying to myself. Every part of me that wants to be seen and that wants to be lived is being seen and being lived. And then when I am that person inside and out, when who I think I am and who my soul says I am is reflected in who I'm showing up as in the world, then I feel really solid about, yeah, how I show up for you is how I'm going to show up for you. And your
Mhm.
experience of me is going to be your experience of me and the way that I experience myself. So there's no fear or hesitation. I think I said last week, I wish I could just download my brain to you so that you
Mm.
can just experience everything the way I experience. Because there's nothing that I don't want you to know. Like, I just want you to have all the experience of how I feel and how I think. So there's not even an opportunity for potentially miscommunicating something. Whereas I think in possibly every past relationship or even friendship, I would have been like, oh, there's definitely stuff that like I'm not sure you could handle. So I'm going to withhold that piece.
Mhm.
Then I'm not showing up as my full self.
Yeah. And
And
all that tells me is when somebody does that, it's that they don't understand it themselves, so they can't
yeah,
possibly explain it to you.
yeah. And if every part of me, even the shame and the guilt and the fear, feels safe with you, that's something to take note of.
Yeah. 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 It's like all of those things when you understand the essence of somebody and who they are. And of course, as human beings, we feel shame and guilt and regret and all the things, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's our resting state, and it doesn't mean that that's our primary operating system, and it doesn't mean that that's who we are. It means it's a portion of who we are under certain circumstances, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Well, what I also know is that myself and others probably have a very low tolerance for any more on this topic. AKA, I think
I
we should wrap it up,
know, I know that we are finished here. Oh,
right?
well, with that being said, I want to send out a special thank you to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for her cover work. You can find out more about Melissa at melissamossart.com. And a thank you to Cloud Cult for our intro and outro music from their song, There's So Much Energy in Us. Who knew that that would be such an apt description when we chose that for our show track? Find out more about Cloud Cult at cloudcult.com. And to our viewers and listeners, we send you such deep gratitude for showing up and for being a part of this unfolding with us. We wish you peace, love, and light.